Chapter 46. Lament of the Blue Lord. To reach the Meluhan capital as quickly as possible, Shiva had commandeered a merchant ship, which docked at Devagiri a little more than a week later. "That must be the ship Sati commandeered," said Shiva, pointing towards an anchored, empty vessel. "It means she's still in Devagiri," said Ganesh. "Bhumaidvi, be praised." Kali clenched her fist. "If they've imprisoned her and hope to negotiate, I will personally destroy everything that moves in this city." "Let's not assume the worst, Kali," said Shiva. "We all know that whatever may be his faults, the emperor will not harm Sati." "I agree," said Kartik. "And don't forget, Queen Kali," said Gopal, "we have the fearsome Pashupashastra. Nobody can stand up to it. Nobody. The mere threat of this terrifying weapon would be enough to achieve our purpose." Their conversation came to a stop with the sound of the gangplank crashing on the deck. "Where is everyone?" asked Shiva, frowning as he stepped onto the gangplank. "How can the port be left abandoned?" asked a surprised Durvati, who had never seen something like this in all the years that she had lived in Meluha. "Let's go," said Shiva, unease trickling down his spine. The entire brigade marched out in step with the Nilkanth. As Shiva's men stepped out of the port area, their eyes fell on the large peace conference building. Inexplicably, a colony of tents had been set up outside the building. "This area has been thoroughly cleaned recently," said Gopal. "Even the grass has been dug out." "Of course, it would be," said Shiva, quietening his fears. "They would need a pure area for the conference." A phalanx of Brahmins was conducting a puja next to the closed door of the peace conference hall. "What are they praying for, Panditji?" asked Shiva. "They are praying for peace," said Gopal. Shiva found nothing amiss in that. "But they're praying for peace for the souls," said a surprised Gopal. "The souls of the dead." Shiva instinctively reached to his side and pulled out his sword. His entire brigade did the same. As they approached the colony, Parvateshwar and Anandami stepped out from one of the tents. Behind them was a short man in a simple white dhoti and ankvistram, his head shaved clean except for a traditional tuft of hair at the crown signifying his Brahmin lineage, and sporting a long, flowing white beard. "Lord Brigu," whispered Gopal, immediately folding his hands together in a namast. "Namast, great Vasudev," said Brigu politely, walking up to Gopal. Shiva held his breath as he stared at his real adversary. A man he was meeting for the first time. "Great Nilkanth," said Brigu. "Great Maharishi," returned Shiva, his grip over his sword tightening. Brigu opened his mouth to say something, hesitated and then looked at Parvateshwar, who had now walked up to stand next to him. Parvateshwar and Anandami bent low in respect to their living god. As Parvateshwar rose, Shiva got his first close look at his friend-turned-foe's face. He was stunned. The Meluhan general's eyes were red and swollen, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Isn't the emperor allowing you into the city?" asked Shiva. "We have chosen not to enter, my lord," said Parvateshwar. "Why?" "We don't recognize him as our emperor anymore." "Is it because you don't agree with what the conference is trying to achieve? Is that why you are waiting here for us, with your Brahmins chanting death hymns?" Parvateshwar could not speak. "If you want a battle, Parvateshwar, you shall have it," announced Shiva. "The battle is over, my lord." "The entire war is over, great Nilkanth," added Brigu. Shiva frowned, astonished. He turned towards Gopal. "Has Princess Sati managed to convince the emperor?" asked Gopal. "We want nothing but the end of the Samras. So long as Meluha agrees to those terms, the Nilkanth is happy to declare peace." "My lord," said Parvateshwar as he touched Shiva's elbow, his eyes brimming with tears. "Come with me." "Where?" Parvateshwar glanced at Shiva briefly, and then looked at the ground again. Please. Come. Shiva sheathed his sword in its scabbard and followed Parvati as he walked towards the peace conference building. He in turn was followed by the others, Vrigu, Kali, Ganesh, Kartik, Gopal, Virabhadra, Kritika, Urvati, Brahaspati, and Tara. An enemy remained outside her tent. She couldn't bear to see what was about to happen. The Brahmins continued their drone of Sanskrit shlokas as Parvati came up to the building's entrance. The general took a deep breath and pushed the large doors open. As Shiva walked in, he was stunned by what he saw. 20 beds had been laid out in the massive hall. Each bed was occupied by an injured soldier, being tended to by a Brahmin doctor. On the first bed lay one of Shiva's most ardent devotees, the one who had found him in Tibet. "Nandi!" screamed Shiva, racing to the bed in a few giant strides. Shiva went down on his knees and touched Nandi's face. He was unconscious. Both his arms had been severed, the left one close to his wrist and the right close to the elbow. There were numerous tiny scars all over his body, perhaps the result of small projectiles. His face was pockmarked with wounds. The bed had been especially designed to keep a part of Nandi's back untouched. He'd probably suffered a serious injury on his back as well. Shiva could see that the wounds were healing, but it was equally obvious that the injuries were grave and his body would take a long time to recover. "The wounds have been left open so they can be aired, Great Nilkanth," said the Brahmin doctor, avoiding his eyes. "We will put in a fresh dressing soon. Major Nandi will heal completely. As will all the other soldiers here." Shiva continued to stare at Nandi, gently touching his face, anger rising within him. He got up suddenly, drew his sword out and pointed it straight at Parvati. "I should murder the emperor for this," growled Shiva. Parvati stood paralyzed, staring at the ground. "If the emperor thinks he can force my hand by doing this and capturing Sati," said Shiva, "he is living in a fool's paradise." "Once Didi knows we are here," hissed Kali to Parvati, "she will escape. And believe me, our wrath will then be terrible. Tell that goat who rules your empire to release my sister. Now." But Parvati remained still, silent. Then he started shaking imperceptibly. "General?" said Gopal, trying to sound reasonable. "There doesn't have to be any violence. Just let the princess go." Brigu attempted to speak to Gopal, but was unable to find the strength to say what he had to. "Lord Brigu," said Gopal, keeping his voice low but stern, "we have the Shastra. We will not hesitate to use it if our demands are not met. Release Princess Sati at once. Destroy the Samras factory in Devagiri. Do it now and we shall leave." Brigu seemed stunned by the news of the Shastra. He turned briefly towards Parvati, but the general had failed to even register the risk from the terrible Devi Astra. He was crying now, his whole body shaking with misery. He cried for the loss of the woman he had loved like the daughter he'd never had. "Parvati," snarled Shiva, moving his sword even closer. "Don't test my patience. Where is Sati?" Parvati finally looked at Shiva as tears streamed down his face. Shiva stared at him, a horrific foreboding entering his heart. The space between his brows began to throb frantically. "My lord," sobbed Parvati, "I'm so sorry." Shiva's sword slipped from his weakened grip as an excruciatingly painful thought entered his mind. With terror-struck eyes, Shiva stepped towards the general. "Parvati, where is she?" "My lord, I did not reach in time." Shiva pulled Parvati by his ankvistram and grabbed his neck hard. "Parvati, where is Sati?" But Parvati could not speak. He continued to cry helplessly. Shiva noticed that Brigu had glanced for one brief moment at a direction behind him. He let go of Parvati and spun around instantly. he saw a large wooden door at the far end of the hall. "Zatii!" screamed Shiva as he ran towards the room. The Brahmin doctors immediately stepped out of the raging Shiva's path. "Sati!" Shiva banged on the door. It was locked. He stepped back, gave himself room, and rammed his shoulder into the door. It yielded an inch before the strong lock snapped it back into place. In that instant, through the crack, Shiva saw a tower made of massive blocks of ice. Before the door slammed back, his brow was burning now, a pain impossible for most mortals to tolerate. One of the Meluhans went running for the keys to the room. "Sati!" cried Shiva and slammed into the door again, splinters sticking into his shoulder, drawing blood. The door held strong. Shiva stepped back and kicked hard. It finally fell open with a thundering crash. The breath was sucked out of the Nilkanth. At the center of the room, within the tower of ice, lay the mutilated body of the finest person he had ever known. His Sati. Sati! The Nilkanth stormed into the room. His brow felt like something had exploded within. Fire was consuming the area between his eyes. He banged his fists repeatedly against the large ice block covering Sati's body, desperately trying to push it away. Blood burst forth from Shiva's shattered knuckles as he pounded against the immovable block. He kept hammering against the ice, breaking bits of it, trying to shove it away, trying to reach his Sati. His blood started seeping into the frozen water. "Sati!" Some Meluhans came running in from the other side of the room, sinking hooks into the block of ice covering Sati. They pulled hard. The block gave way and started sliding back. Shiva continued to hit hard, desperately pushing against it. The block was barely halfway out when Shiva leapt onto the tower. A small depression had been carved in the ice, like a tomb. Within that icy coffin lay Sati's body, her hands folded across her chest. Shiva jumped into the tomb and pulled her body up, holding it tight in his arms. She was frozen stiff, her skin dulled to a grayish blue. There was a deep cut across her face, and her left eye had been gouged out. Her left hand had been partially sliced off. There were 2 gaping holes in her abdomen. Frozen blood, which had seeped out of her multiple injuries, lay congealed all across her mutilated body. Shiva pulled Sati close as he looked up, crying desperately, screaming incoherently, his heart inundated, his soul shattered. "Sati!" It was a wail that would haunt the world for millennia. Chapter 47. A Mother's Message. The setting sun infused the sky with a profusion of colors, casting a dull glow on the Peace Conference building. Parvateshwar's camp had been cleared out. A raging Kartik had threatened to kill every single man present. Not wanting to further excite the justified fury of the Nilkanth's son, Brigu had ordered the retreat of Parvateshwar. An enemy and their men entered Devagiri, a city they had refused to enter thus far. Gopal was outside the Peace Conference building, in the temporary camp that had been set up for Shiva's brigade. The Vasudev chief was in discussion with the brigade commander on the best course of action. Everyone wanted vengeance, but attacking Devagiri with just one brigade was unwise. Though the main Meluhan army and its allies were waylaid in faraway Mohenjo-daro by its citizens, Devagiri still had enough troops to defend itself. The defensive features of the capital, moreover, could not be scaled with an offensive force as small as the one under Shiva's command. Some of them suggested using the Pashupashastra. Gopal immediately rejected it. There was no question of using the weapon. Both Shiva and he had given their word. Urvati had busied herself in the outer room of the Peace Conference building, supervising the recovery of Sati's injured bodyguards. As she attended to the medical infusions being administered to a patient, her eyes strayed towards the locked door of the inner room. Sati's dead body lay there, with her family mourning quietly behind. Closed doors. Urvati wiped a tear and got back to work. Keeping herself busy was the only way in which she could cope with her grief. The inner room, where Sati's body had been kept temporarily, had been built by the Meluhans to fulfill the princess' last wish of preserving her body till Shiva arrived. Tiny holes had been drilled high in the inner chamber walls with many huge blacksmiths' bellows fitted into them to push in air regularly. A massive wooden circular gear had been constructed outside the Peace Conference building with 20 bulls harnessed to it. The non-stop circular movement of the beasts made the gear move constantly. This, in turn, powered the steady squeezing and releasing of the blacksmith bellows, through a system of smaller gears and pulleys, thus pushing in air regularly into the inner room that stored Sati's body. A screen of jute, cotton and a special cooling material had been hung in front of the bellows. Through a system of pipes and capillaries, water dripped down the screen in a constant stream. The air pushed through the bellows would pass through this screen, and cool down rapidly before flowing into the room. The integrity of the ice tower had been maintained with this classic Meluhan technology, but now the ice within the heart of the tower had begun to gradually melt due to the heat emanating from Shiva's body and his rapid breathing. This had caused Sati's corpse to thaw slowly, making her frozen blood melt. A pale, colorless fluid oozed out, appearing almost to weep from her wounds ever so gently. Shiva sat there, immobile, shivering due to the cold and his grief, stunned into absolute silence, staring into nothingness, holding Sati's lifeless body in his arms. Despite sitting on ice, Shiva's brow throbbed desperately, as if a great fire raged within. An angry, blackish red blotch had formed between his brows. He had been sitting thus for many hours. He hadn't moved. He hadn't eaten. He had stopped crying. It was almost as if he had chosen to be as lifeless as the love of his life. Kali sat near the door of the inner room, sobbing loudly, cursing herself for her behavior during her last meeting with Sati. It was a guilt that she would carry for the rest of her life. Uncontrollable rage was rising within her slowly but steadily. At this point, though, it was still swamped by her grief. Kritika sat next to the tower of ice, shaking uncontrollably. She had cried till she had no tears left. She kept touching the ice tower every few seconds. Vibhadra, his eyes swollen red, sat quietly next to her. One arm was around his wife Kritika, drawing as well as giving comfort. But his other arm was stiff, its fist clenched tight. He wanted vengeance. He wanted to torture and annihilate every single person who'd done this to Sati, who had done this to his friend Shiva. Brahaspati and Zara sat quietly at another end of the room. The former Meluhan chief scientist face was soaked with tears. He respected Sati as an icon of the Meluhan way of life. He also knew that Shiva would never be the same again. Ever. Dara kept staring at Shiva as her heart went out to the unfortunate Nilkanth. He was a mere shadow of the confident and friendly man she had met at Paraya. Kartik and Ganesh sat impassively next to each other on the icy floor, their backs resting against the wall. Their eyes were fixed on the tower, on their father's paralyzed figure on top, holding their mother's mutilated body. The tears had almost blinded their eyes. The deluge of sorrow had stunned their hearts. They sat quietly, holding hands, desperately trying to make sense of what had happened. Ganesh thought he saw some movement on top of the ice tower. He looked up to a bewildering sight. His mother seemed to have risen from her body and floated high up in the air. Ganesh moved his gaze back to his father to see another body of his mother lying still in his father's arms. Ganesh looked up again at his mother's apparition, his mouth agape. Sati flew in a great arc and landed softly in front of Ganesh. Her feet didn't touch the ground, remaining suspended in the air, just like those of mythical goddesses. She wore a garland of fresh flowers, again like mythical goddesses. But mythical goddesses didn't bleed. Sati, on the other hand, was bleeding profusely. Ganesh could see her mutilated body as she stood in front of him, her left eye gouged out with a deep cut across her face, leaking blood slowly. The burn scar on her face was flaming red, as though still burning. Her left hand had been sliced through brutally, blood spurting out of the wound. In sudden jerks, timed with her heartbeat, there were two massive wounds in her abdomen from which blood was streaming out with the ferocity of a young mountain river. There were several small serrations all across her body, each of them seeping out even more blood. Sati's right fist was clenched tight, her body shaking with fury. Her right eye was bloodshot, focused directly on Ganesh. Her blood-soaked hair was loose, fluttering, as if a great wind had been assaulting it. It was a fearsome sight. Ma! Avenge me! Hissed Sati. Ma! Avenge me! Ganesh pulled his hand away from Kartik's and clenched it tight. He gritted his teeth and whispered within the confines of his mind. I will, Ma! Remember how I died! Snarled Sati. I will. I will. Promise me. You will remember how I died. I promise, Ma. I will always remember. Sati suddenly vanished. Ganesh reached out with his hand, weeping desperately. Ma. At exactly the same time as Ganesh, Kartik too saw his mother's apparition. Sati's spirit appeared to escape from her body and hovered for some time before landing in front of Kartik. Her feet were suspended a little above the ground, a garland of fresh flowers around her neck. But unlike the vision that Ganesh had seen, the apparition in front of Kartik was whole and complete. There was no wound. She looked exactly the way Kartik remembered seeing her last. Tall of stature and bronze-skinned, she wore a beautiful smile which formed dimples on both her cheeks. Her bright blue eyes shone with gentle radiance, her black hair was tied demurely in a bun. Her erect posture and calm expression reminded Kartik of what she symbolized, an uncompromising Meluhan who always put the law and the welfare of others before herself. Kartik burst out crying. Ma! My son, whispered Sati. Ma! I will torture everyone. I will kill every single one of them. I will drink their blood. I will burn down this entire city. I will avenge you. No, said Sati softly. A dumbfounded Kartik fell silent. Don't you remember anything? I will remember you forever, Ma. And I will make all of Devagiri pay for what they did to you. Sati's face became stern. Don't you remember anything I've taught you? Kartik remained silent. Vengeance is a waste of time, said Sati. I am not important. The only thing that matters is Dharma. Do you want to prove your love for me? Do so by doing the right thing. Don't surrender to anger. Surrender only to Dharma. Ma. Forget how I died, said Sati. Remember how I lived. Ma. Promise me. You will remember how I lived. I promise, Ma. I will always remember. Chapter 48. The Great Debate. The ones amongst Shiva's brigade who were seeking vengeance got a boost the next morning. Against all expectations, Bharat sailed in at the head of the entire army of 250,000 troops. The Indian prince had been worried about what would happen to his lord if the Meluhans tried some trickery at Devagiri. He had marched the troops all the way from Lothal to the Saraswati, through the broad Meluhan highways without a halt, breaking only for brief food breaks and minuscule rest sessions. At the Saraswati, he had commandeered as many merchant ships as possible and raced up the great river, to Devagiri. "O Lord Ram!" whispered a stunned Bharat. Gopal had just told Bharat about what had occurred at Devagiri and the brutal manner in which Sati had been killed. "Where is the princess' body?" asked Chinardwaj, tears welling up in his eyes. "In the Peace Conference building," said Gopal. "The Lord Nilkanth is with her. He hasn't moved from there in the last 24 hours. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't spoken. He's just sitting there, holding Princess Sati's body." Chandrakanta looked up at the sky. He turned around and wiped away a tear. Those pearls of emotion were signs of weakness in a Kshatriya. "We'll kill every single one of those bastards," growled Bhagat, his knuckles whitening on his clenched fists. "We'll obliterate this entire city. There will be no trace left of this place. They have hurt our living god." "Prince Bhagat," said Gopal, his palms open in supplication. "We cannot punish the entire city. We must keep a clear head. We should only punish those who are responsible for this assassination. We should destroy the Samras factory. We must leave the rest unharmed. That is the right thing to do." "Forgive me, great Vasudev," interrupted Chandrakanta, "but some crimes are so terrible that the entire community must be made to pay. They have killed Lady Sati, and, in such a brutal manner. But not everyone came out to kill her. A vast majority was not even aware of what the Emperor was up to," argued Gopal. "They could have come out to stop the killing once it had begun, couldn't they?" asked Chandrakanta. "Standing by and watching a sin being committed is as bad as committing it oneself. Don't the Vasudevs say this?" "This is an entirely different context, King Chandrakanta," said Gopal. "I disagree, Panditji," said Mutli, the king of Ashli. "Devagiri must pay." "I think Lord Gopal is right, King Mutli," said Chinardwaj, the Lothal governor. "We cannot punish everyone in Devagiri for the sins of a few." "Why am I not surprised to hear this?" asked Mutli. "What is that supposed to mean?" asked Chinardwaj, stung to the quick. "You are Meluhan," said Mutli. "You will stand up for your people. We are Chandravanshis. We are the ones who are truly loyal to the Lord Nilkanth." Chinardwaj stepped up close to Mutli threateningly. "I rebelled against my own people, against my country's laws, against my vows of loyalty to Meluha because I am a follower of the Nilkanth. I am loyal to Lord Shiva. And, I don't need to prove anything to you." "Calm down everyone," said Chandrakanta, the Branga king. "Let's not forget who the real enemy is." "The real enemy is Devagiri," said Mutli. "They did this to Lady Sati. They must be punished. It's as simple as that. I agree," said Bhagat. "We should use the Pashupashastra." Gopal flared with anger. "The Pashupashastra is not some random arrow that can be fired without any thought, Prince Bhagat. It will leave total death and devastation behind in this area for centuries to come." "Maybe that is what this place deserves," said Chandrakanta. "These are Devyastras," said an agitated Gopal. "They cannot be used casually to settle disputes among men." "Lord Shiva is not just another man," said Bhagat. "He is divine. We must use the weapon too. We cannot use the Pashupashastra. That is final," said Gopal. "I don't think so, Panditji," said Chandrakanta. "Lady Sati was a great leader and warrior with the highest moral standards. The Lord Nilkanth loved Lady Sati more than I've seen any man love his wife. I'm sure Lord Shiva wants vengeance. And frankly, so do we. It's not vengeance that we need, King Chandrakanta," said Gopal, "but justice. The people who did this to Lady Sati must face justice. But only those who are responsible for this perfidy. Nobody else should be punished. For that would be an even bigger injustice." "Yours is the voice of reason, Panditji," said Mutli. "But this is not the time for reason. This is the time for anger." "I don't think the Nilkanth will make a decision in anger," said Gopal. "Then, Why don't we ask Lord Shiva? Asked Bharat. Let him decide. Kill them all, growled Kali. I want this entire city to burn with every one of its citizens in it. All the commanders of Shiva, including his family members, were seated in a secluded area on the peace conference platform, outside the main building. Brahaspati and Tara had also joined in, but remained mostly silent. The area had been cordoned off by soldiers to prevent anyone from listening in on the deliberations. Gopal had tried to get Shiva to attend, but the Nilkants did not respond to any of his entreaties. He remained alone, within the freezing inner chamber, holding sati. Queen Kali, argued Gopal, my apologies for disagreeing with you, but we cannot do this. This is morally wrong. Didn't the Meluhans give their word that this is a peace conference? Nobody is supposed to use arms at a peace conference, right? They did something that is very morally wrong. How come you didn't notice that, Panditji? Two wrongs don't make a right. I don't care, said Kali, waving her hand dismissively. Devagiri will be destroyed. They will pay for what they did to my sister. Queen Kali, said Chinardwaj carefully. I respect you immensely. You're a great woman. You have always fought for justice. But does punishing an entire city for the crimes of a few serve justice? Kali cast him a withering look. I saved your life, Chinardwaj. I know, your highness. How can I forget that? That is the reason. You will do what I tell you to do, interrupted Kali. My sister will be avenged. Chinardwaj tried to argue. But my sister will be avenged. Chinardwaj fell silent. But Bharat was carefully avoiding this discussion. While walking towards the peace conference building, he had learnt that his sister Ananmi was in Devagiri. The city would be destroyed, but he had to save his sister first. I agree with Queen Kali, said Chandrakatu. Devagiri must be destroyed. We must use Shastra. At the mention of the devastating Devyastra, Kartik spoke up for the first time. The astra cannot be used. Gopal looked at Kartik, grateful to have at least one member of the Nilkants family on his side. Justice will be done, said Kartik. Ma's blood will be avenged. But not with the Shastra. It cannot be done with that terrible weapon. It must not, agreed Gopal immediately. The Nilkants has given his word to the Vayuputras that he will not use the Shastra. If that is the case, then we cannot use it, said Bharat. Gopal breathed easy, glad to have pulled at least some of them back from the brink. The question remains, how do we give justice to Princess Sati? By killing them all, roared Kali. But is it fair to kill children who had nothing to do with this? Asked Bharat. You are assuming, Prince Bharat, said Kali, that Meluhans care for their children. Your Highness, said Bharat. Please try to understand that children who had nothing to do with this crime should not be punished. Fine, said Kali. We will let their children out. And non-combatants as well, said Kartik. Particularly the women, said Bharat. We must let them go. But once they are out, we should destroy the entire city. Is there anyone else you would like to save? Asked Kali sarcastically. What about the dogs in Devagiri? Should we lead them out too? Maybe the cockroaches as well? But Bharat did not respond. Anything he said would only inflame Kali further. Kali cursed. All right. Children and non-combatants will be allowed out. Everyone else will remain prisoner in the city. And they will all be killed. Agreed, said Bharat. All I'm saying is that we should be fair. That is not all there is to it, Prince Bharat, erupted Kartik. The Samras is not to be destroyed. My father had been very clear about that. It is only supposed to be taken out of the equation. We do have to destroy the Samras factory. But we also have to ensure that the knowledge of the Samras is not lost. We have to save the scientists and take them to a secret location. They will be a part of the tribe that my father will leave behind. These people will keep the knowledge of the Samras alive. Today it is evil, but there may come a time in the future when the Samras may be good again. Gopal nodded. Kartik has spoken wisely. This means that even if some of these scientists had something to do with my mother's death, said Kartik, we have to set aside our pain and save them. We have to save them for the sake of India's future. Ganesh glared at Kartik with dagger eyes. Set aside our pain? Kartik became silent. Ganesh was breathing heavily, barely able to keep a hold on his emotions. Don't you feel any anger about Ma's death? Any rage? Any fury? Dada, what I was trying to say. You always received Ma's love on a platter, from the day you were born. That's why you don't value it. Dada. Ask me about the value of a mother's love. Ask me how much you hanker for it when you don't have it. Dada, I loved her too. You know why. Did you see her body, Kartik? Did you? Have you looked at her body? Dada, of course, I have. There are 51 wounds on her. I counted them, Kartik. 51. I know. Furious tears were pouring down Ganesh's face. Those bastards must have continued hacking at her even after she was dead. Dada, listen. Ganesh's body was shaking with anger now. Didn't you feel any rage when you saw your mother's mutilated body? Of course I did, Dada, but. What but can there be? She was attacked by many of those Samras worshipping demons simultaneously. It is our duty to avenge her. Our duty. It is the least we can do. For the best mother in the world. Dada, she was the best mother. But she taught us to always put the world before ourselves. Ganesh didn't say anything. His long floppy nose had stiffened, like it did on the rare occasions when he was enraged. Kartik spoke softly. Dada, if we were any other family I would give in to my rage. But we are not. Ganesh looked away, too livid to even respond. We are the family of the Nilkanth, said Kartik. We have a responsibility to the world. Responsibility to the world? My parents are my world. Kartik fell silent. Ganesh pointed his finger threateningly towards Kartik. Not one of those Samras worshipping bastards will get out of here alive. Dada. Every single one of them will be killed, even if I have to kill them myself. Kartik fell silent. Gopal sighed as he looked at Kali, Ganesh, and Kartik. There was too much anger. He couldn't figure out a way to save the Samras scientists from Ganesh and Kali's rage. But at least he had managed to take the conversation away from the dangerous talk of using the Pashupashastra. And maybe there was still hope that, over the next few hours, he would convince the Nilkanth family of the necessity of saving the Samras scientists. Shiva had been sitting quietly in the icy tomb, holding Sati's body. His eyes were sunken and expressionless, with no light of hope in them, with no reason to even exist. The blackish red blotch on his brow was visibly throbbing, he was shivering due to the cold. A single droplet of fluid had escaped from Sati's good eye, now closed, and ran down her face like a tear. There was an unearthly silence in the room, except for the soft hissing of the cold air being pumped in at regular intervals. A sudden sharp noise startled Shiva, perhaps from the bull's harness to the Meluhan cooling system. He looked around with cold, emotionless eyes. There was nobody in the chamber. He looked down at his dead wife. He pulled her body close and kissed her gently on her forehead. Then he carefully placed her back on the ice. Caressing her face tenderly, Shiva whispered, "Stay here, Sati. I'll be back soon." Shiva jumped off the ice tower and walked up to the door of the inner chamber. As soon as he opened it, Yervati stood up. Accompanied by her medical team, she had been tending to Nandi and the other soldiers for the last 24 hours. My lord, said Yervati, her eyes red and swollen from accumulated misery and lack of sleep. Shiva ignored her and continued walking. Yervati looked at Shiva with foreboding and terror. She had never seen the Nilkanth's eyes look so hard and remote. He looked like he had gone beyond rage, beyond ruthlessness, beyond insanity. Shiva opened the main door. He heard voices to his right. He turned to see his commanders in deep discussion. Tara was the first to notice him. Lord Nilkanth, said Tara, immediately rising to her feet. Shiva stared at her blankly for a few seconds, then took a deep breath and spoke evenly. Tara, the Pashupashastra trunk is in my ship. Bring it here. A panic-stricken Gopal rushed towards Shiva. He knew that Shiva hadn't eaten in 24 hours. He hadn't slept. He had been sitting on top of an inhumanly cold tower. Grief had practically unhinged him. He knew the Nilkanth wasn't himself. My friend. Listen to me. Don't make a decision like this in haste. Shiva looked at Gopal, his face frozen. I know you are angry, Nilkanth. But don't do this. I know your good heart. You will repent it. Shiva turned around to walk back into the conference building. Gopal reached out and held Shiva's arm, trying to pull him back. Shiva, pleaded Gopal, you've given your word to the Vayuputras. You've given your word to your uncle, Lord Mithra. Shiva gripped Gopal's hand tightly and removed it from his arm. Shiva, the power of this weapon is terrible and unpredictable, pleaded Gopal, grasping at any argument to stop this tragedy. Even if the Pashupashastra's destruction is restricted to the inner circle, any attempt to destroy all 3 platforms of Devagiri will widen this circle. It will not just destroy Devagiri, it will also destroy all of us. Do you really want to kill your entire army, your family and your friends? Tell them to leave. Shiva's voice was soft, barely audible. His eyes remained remote and unfocused, staring into space. Gopal paused for a moment, watching Shiva with a glimmer of hope. Should I tell our people to leave? With the Pashupashastra? Shiva did not move. There was no reaction on his face. No. Tell the people of this city to leave. All except those who have protected or made the Samras, and those directly responsible for Sati's death. For when I am done, there will be no more Daksha. There will be no more Samras. There will be no more evil. It will be as if this place, this evil, never existed. Nothing will live here, nothing will grow here, and no 2 stones will be left standing upon each other to show that there ever was a Devagiri. It all ends now. Gopal was grateful that at least the innocent people of Devagiri would be saved. But what about Lord Yudha's law banning the use of Devyastras? Shiva, the Pashupashastra, whispered Gopal with hope. Shiva stared at Gopal unemotionally and spoke in a voice that was eerily composed. I will burn down this entire world. Gopal stared at Shiva with foreboding. The Nilkanth turned around and walked back into the building, to his sati. Tara rose. Where are you going? Whispered Brahaspati. To get the Pashupashastra, answered Tara softly. You cannot. It will destroy us all. No, it won't. These weapons can be triangulated in such a way that the devastation will remain confined within the city. We will not be affected if we remain more than 5 kilometers away. Tara began to walk away. Brahaspati pulled her back and whispered urgently, What are you doing? You know this is wrong. I feel for Shiva, but the Pashupashastra. Tara stared at Brahaspati without a hint of doubt in her eyes. Lord Ram's sacred law shave been shamelessly broken. The Nilkanth deserves his vengeance. Of course, he does, said Brahaspati, meeting her gaze without flinching. But not with the Pashupashastra. Don't you feel his pain? What kind of friend are you? Tara, I had once considered doing something wrong. I had wanted to assassinate a man who was to duel Sati. Shiva stopped me. He stopped me from taking a sin upon my soul. If I have to be a true friend to him, I have to stop him from tarnishing his soul. I can't let him use the Pashupashastra. His soul is already dead, Brahaspati. It's lying on top of that ice tower, said Tara. I know, but. Tara pulled her hand away from Brahaspati. You expect him to fight in accordance with the laws when his enemies have not. They have taken everything from him, his life, his soul, his entire reason for existence. He deserves his vengeance. Chapter 49. Death to the Nilkanth. Shiva's army had been divided into 3 groups, led by Bhagat, Chandrakatu and Mutli. Each group was stationed outside the gates of the 3 platforms of Devagiri. Mutli's troops blocked the Svarna platform, Chandrakatu's forces guarded the exit from the Rajat platform, and Bhagat's troops were at the steps of the Tamara platform. Shiva's instructions had been followed. Ignoring Kali's protests, Shiva's forces informed those within the city that they would be allowed to leave, all except those Kshatriyas who had fought to protect the Samras and those Brahmins who had worked to create the Samras. Daksha and his personal bodyguards, including Vidin Mali, had also been specifically excluded from the amnesty. An evacuation had begun. What amazed the Chandravanshis among Shiva's troops was the number of citizens who chose to stay on and die with Devagiri. There were many who came in a disciplined line to the city gates, said a dignified goodbye to their families and walked silently back to their homes to await death. There was no acrimony, no fighting at the gates or attempts to save the city. Not even melodramatic farewells. Gopal and Kartik had stationed themselves at the Tamri platform, along with Bhagat's troops. The soldiers on this side were primarily Brangas. Attired Bhagat, having just supervised the construction of the perimeter barricades, rejoined them. The Indian prince nodded towards the odd movements of citizens at the gate, half of them leaving and the other half returning to the city. What's going on here? Kartik dropped his eyes and said nothing, while Gopal's eyes welled up. It is becoming a movement amongst the Meluhans, said the chief of the Vasudevs. An act of honor. A cause that demands your life. Stay and die with your city. Have your soul purified by allowing yourself to be killed by the Nilkanth. He stopped himself, obviously overcome with emotion. Bhagat raised his eyebrows. What do you mean? Gopal gestured towards the crowd, where yet another woman had said goodbye to a couple, before calmly turning back towards the city. See for yourself, he said. Bhagat paused for a moment, brows knitted, to study Gopal's face before turning back to the woman. Excuse me, madam, Bhagat called out to her, and she stopped, turning to face him. Why are you returning to the city? Why are you not evacuating with the others? The folds of her ankvistram wafted gently in the breeze around her. She had a kind face with dark, quiet eyes and a soft voice. She spoke calmly, as if she was discussing the weather. I am a Meluhan. To be Meluhan is not about the country you live in, it is about how you live, what you believe in. What is the purpose of a long life, if not to strive for something higher? Lord Ram's most sacred law has been broken. We have fallen. All that we are has already been destroyed. What can we now hope to strive for in this life, if this is our karma? Bhagat couldn't believe his ears. The Meluhan woman continued. I believe in the Nilkanth. I have waited for him for so many years, worshipped him. And this is what Meluha has done to him. To our princess. The most exemplary Meluhan of us all, who lived every breath of her life strictly according to Lord Ram's code. This is what Meluha has done to our laws that make us who we are. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching his. I am guilty. I took the Samras. I followed the emperor and, through my complacency and silence, was party to everything that conspired to bring this about. If this is Meluha's evil, then it is my evil. 2. My karma. I will pay my debt to the Nilkanth this day, and pray that it may allow him to be reborn with a little less sin upon my soul. Bharat was stunned. What logic was this? She inclined her head in a half nod towards him, and again began walking with perfect composure back into the city. Gopal's voice came from behind him. I know. They all say the same thing. I am Meluhan. The law has been broken. It is my karma. They stood in silence together and watched the woman go. Prince Bharat. The two of them started slightly, pulled out of their silent contemplation. Yes, Kartik, said Bharat, turning to face him. I want you to call General Parveshwar. I have already sent in a messenger to get an enemy, said Bharat. But neither she nor her husband has come as yet. She will not leave without Parveshwar. I'm still trying to convince the both of them. Tell them, said Gopal, Lord Kartik and I have invited them here. We need to talk about something that is important for India's future. Bharat frowned. He knew that what Gopal and Kartik were suggesting was the only way to get his sister and her husband out of Devagiri, tenuous though it may be. I will go into the city myself, said Bharat. And, Prince Bharat? Gopal hesitated. I understand, Panditji. I will not breathe a word of this to anyone. They stood in silence together, looking at a city that would no longer exist tomorrow. Excuse me, said a voice. They turned around to see a small group of Meluhans. Yes? Asked Kartik. We left the city this morning but have changed our minds now. We would like to stay. May we go back in? Gopal stared at them in disbelief, and Bharat dropped his eyes, praying that he would be able to convince his sister to leave. It was late into the third hour and the sun was on its way down. This would be the last time that the sun would set on Devagiri. Virini looked up at the sky as she walked out of the Devagiri royal palace. Your Highness, saluted a guard smartly, falling into step behind her. Virini absently waved her hand and walked towards the gate. Your Highness? Are you leaving? Asked the shocked guard. He seemed genuinely stunned that the Meluhan queen was abandoning them and taking up the Nilkanth's offer of amnesty. Virini didn't bother with a reply but continued walking down the road, towards the Svarna platform gate. Has this been ordered by the Nilkanth? Asked an enemy, before looking at her husband. Parveshwar and she were in a secluded section outside the Tamri platform, speaking with Gopal, Kartik, and Bharat. It's what he would want, said Gopal. He just doesn't know it at this point of time. Parveshwar frowned. If the Nilkanth has said no, then it means no. General, I appreciate your loyalty, said Gopal. But there is also the larger picture. The Samras is evil now. But it's not supposed to be completely destroyed. You know as well as I do, it's only supposed to be taken out of the equation. We have to keep the knowledge of the Samras alive, for it may well be required again. It's the future of India that we are talking about. Are you suggesting that the Lord Nilkanth doesn't care about India? Asked Parveshwar. I'm saying no such thing, General, said Gopal. But Kartik suddenly stepped in. I appreciate your loyalty to my father. And, I'm sure you're aware of my love for him as well. Parveshwar nodded, not saying anything. My father is distraught at this point in time, said Kartik. You know of his devotion to my mother. The grief of her death has clouded his mind. He is furious, and rightly so. But you also know that his heart is pure. He would not want to do anything that is against his dharma. I only intend to keep the technology of the Samras alive till my father's rage subsides. If, after calm reflection, he still decides that everything associated with the Samras should be destroyed, I will personally see to it. Parvati stared into space, his eyes brooding and dark. And in order to do that you must ensure the survival of the Brahmins, together with their Samras libraries, he sighed. Many of those Samras worshipping intellectuals would grab the opportunity to live. But there are some who have heard the call of honor. Kartik, you cannot coerce a man to forsake his honor. You cannot force him to live. Particularly if it is to continue the Samras which his Nikanth has declared evil, and which is causing the destruction of his homeland. Kartik held Parvateshwar's hand. General, my mother appeared in a dream to me. She told me to do the right thing. She told me to remember how she lived, and not how she died. Even she would have done exactly what I'm trying to do. Parvateshwar looked up at the sky and quickly wiped a tear. He was quiet for a long time. All right, Kartik, he said at last. I will bring those people out. I will talk them out where I can, and force them out where I cannot. But remember, they are your responsibility. They cannot be allowed to propagate evil any longer. Only the Lord Nilkanth can decide the fate of the Samras. Not you, not Lord Gopal, nor anyone else. Virini rapidly walked down the Svarna platform steps as all the assembled people made way for their queen. Mali's forces were in charge here, checking the papers and antecedents of everyone who sought to leave the city. The soldiers saluted Virini. She acknowledged them distractedly but kept walking towards the massive wooden tower being constructed a good 4 kilometers from the city. That was the base from which the Pashupashastra missile would be launched. As she neared the tower, Virini could see Shiva issuing instructions. She immediately recognized the woman who stood next to him, Brahaspati's love, Tara. Ganesh was working with Tara, his brilliant engineering skills coming in handy in building the solid tower. Kali sat a little distance away on a rock, seemingly lost in thought. Kali was the first to see her. Ma. Virini walked up to Shiva as Kali and Ganesh stepped up. Shiva looked at Virini with glazed eyes, the now constant throbbing pain in his brow making it difficult for him to focus. Virini had always been struck by Shiva's eyes, the intelligence, focus and mirth that resided in them. She believed that it was his eyes, rather than his blue throat, that were the foundation of his charisma. But they now reflected nothing but pain and grief, giving a glimpse into a soul that had lost its reason to live. Shiva had not for a moment suspected that Virini was involved with Sati's assassination in any way. He bowed his head and brought his hands together in a respectful namaste. Virini held Shiva's hand, her eyes drawn to the throbbing blackish red blotch on his brow. My son, I can't even imagine the pain that you are going through. Shiva was quiet, looking lost and broken. I gave my word to Sati, a promise she extracted from me just before her death. I am here to fulfill it. Shiva's eyes suddenly found their focus. He looked up at Virini. She insisted that she be cremated by both her sons. Ganesh, who was standing next to Virini, sucked in his breath as tears slipped from his eyes. Tradition held that while the eldest child cremated the father, it was the youngest who conducted the funeral proceedings of the mother. Also, it was considered inauspicious for Nagas to be involved in any funeral ceremony. So Ganesh had not expected the honor of lighting his mother's pyre. Kali turned and held Ganesh. But traditionally only the youngest child can perform the mother's last rites, said Virini to Shiva. If there is anyone who can challenge that tradition, it is you. I don't give a damn about that tradition, said Shiva. If Sati wanted it, then it will be done. I'll tell Kartik as well, said Virini. I've been told he's at the Tamara platform. Shiva nodded silently before looking back towards the building where Sati's body lay, entombed in ice. Virini stepped forward to embrace Shiva. He held his mother-in-law lightly. "Try to find some peace, Shiva," said Virini. "It's what Sati would have wanted." "Have you been able to find peace?" Virini smiled wanly. "We will only find peace now when we meet Sati again," said Shiva. "She was a great woman. Any mother would be proud to have a daughter like her." Shiva kept quiet, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. Virini held Shiva's hand. "I have to tell you this. She could have been alive. When she found out about the conspiracy, she was in Devagiri, in our palace. She could have chosen to stay out of it. But she fought her way out of the city and rushed into the battle to save Nandi and her other bodyguards. And she did save many. She died a brave, honorable, warrior's death, fighting and challenging her opponents till her last breath. It was the kind of death she always wished for herself, that any warrior wishes for himself." Shiva's eyes welled up again. Sati set very high standards for herself. Virini smiled sadly. Shiva took a deep breath. He needed to focus on the Pashupashastra. He folded his hands together into a polite namaste. "I should." "Of course," said Virini. "I understand." Shiva bent and touched his mother-in-law's feet. She touched his head gently and blessed him. He turned and walked back to supervise the work on the weapon. This was the only thing that stopped his spirit from imploding. Virini turned and embraced her daughter Kali and grandson Ganesh. "I have been unfair to the both of you," said Virini. "No, you haven't, ma'am," said Kali. "It was father who committed the sins, not you. But I failed in my duty as a mother. I should have abandoned my husband when he refused to accept you." Kali shook her head. "You had your duty as a wife as well. It is not a wife's duty to support her husband in his misdeeds. In fact, a good wife corrects her husband when he is wrong, even if she has to ram it down his throat." "I don't think he would have listened, Nani," said Ganesh to his grandmother. "No matter how hard you tried. That man is." Virini looked at her grandson as Ganesh checked himself from insulting his grandfather to her face. She noticed his eyes. They weren't calm and detached, like they had been the last time she had met him. They were full of rage, repressed fury over his mother's death. "Nani, if you will excuse me. I need to work on the tower." "Of course, my child." Ganesh bent down, touched his grandmother's feet and walked back to Tara. "Ma'am, wait for a bit and Ganesh will take you to our ship," said Kali. "You can stay there till this is over and then return with us to Panchavati. It would be so wonderful to have you in my home, even if it is 100 years after it was meant to be. Having you with us will help us all cope with our grief and the vacuum left behind by Sati." Virini smiled and embraced Kali. "I'll have to wait for my next birth to live in your home, my child." Kali was taken aback. "Ma, you don't have to be punished for that old goat's crimes. You will not return to Devagiri." "Don't be ridiculous, Kali. I'm the queen of Meluha. When Devagiri dies, so shall I." "Of course not," cried Kali. "There's no reason. Would you leave Panchavati on the day of its destruction?" Kali was stumped. But the Naga queen was not one who gave in easily. "That's a hypothetical question, ma. What is important is that—" "What is important, my child," interrupted Virini, "is the identity of the man who helped your father execute the conspiracy. Many of the conspirators have escaped, as have the assassins. They will not die here tomorrow. You need to find them. You need to punish them." Chapter 50. Saving a Legacy. The sun had long set across the western horizon. Kartik, Gopal and Bhagat were stationed at the far corner of the Tamara platform. neither the other two Devagiri platforms nor Shiva's army encampment had a clear view of this area. It was the best place for Kartik to carry out his mission. 20 Branga soldiers from the command of Devotas, who had become fanatically loyal to Kartik after the Battle of Balai-Tibalkund, were with him. These soldiers held on tightly to a rope, gently allowing it to roll away from them at a gradual pace. Devotas worked along with them. The rope was attached to a pulley that had been rigged on top of the Tamara platform wall. Circling the pulley, the rope went down to where it had been tied to a wooden cage, which could carry 10 Brahmins at a time. 10 of them, together with their books and essential equipment, were descending towards Kartik's refuge. Secrecy was essential, for it was forbidden to remove any knowledge of the Samras from the city, the penalty being death. As a failsafe, another rope had been tied to the wooden cage. This particular rope was also circled around a pulley that was rigged onto the foreign wall. But the grasping end of this rope was in the hands of Suryavanshi soldiers at the top of the platform. They were being supervised by Parvateshwar. Both groups of soldiers worked in tandem to release their end of the ropes at the same pace, so that the cage could descend gently to the ground. The angle of the wall made it impossible for Parvateshwar to look over and judge the movement of the wooden cage as well as its distance from the ground. And if the Suryavanshis holding the rope on top did not synchronize their movement with Devota's team below, it could lead to the cage becoming unbalanced, resulting in a possible accident. To prevent this from happening, Bharat had been made to stand at a distance, far enough to be able to view both Devota's team as well as the Suryavanshis above. The new moon helped aid Bharat's vision. His task was to keep whistling the way birds do, but in a steady rhythm, till the wooden cage touched the ground. He played the role of a timekeeper, setting the pace for the movements of the soldiers. Kartik whirled around when Bharat's whistling stopped. Devotas and his team had not paused but continued releasing the rope at the same pace. The Suryavanshis on top of the foreign walls, however, used to following orders, had instantly come to a halt when Bharat stopped whistling. Immediately, the wooden cage became unbalanced and tilted heavily to one side. "Stop!" hissed Kartik. Devotas and his team stopped. The cage containing 10 Brahmins of the Samras factory remained suspended dangerously in the air. To the admiration of Gopal, the Brahmins in the cage remained quiet despite the possibility of falling to their death. Any sharp noise would have alerted others to what was going on. Kartik rushed towards Bharat, who seemed lost in his own world. "Prince Bharat?" Bharat immediately came out of his stupor and began to whistle. The Suryavanshis started releasing the rope at a steady pace and the wooden cage descended softly to the ground. The Brahmins caged within stepped out quickly in an orderly fashion. As the two teams began pulling the empty cage back up, the whistling was no longer required. In the upward movement, what was necessary was speed, and not steadiness. "Prince Bharat, please pay attention. The lives of many people are at stake." Kartik was aware of the reason behind Bharat's distress. Parvateshwar had refused to leave Devagiri. The Meluhan general had decided he would perish along with his beloved city. And to Bharat's utter dismay, an enemy had decided to stay with her husband. Bharat had fought passionately with her over her decision. He had pleaded with her, had begged her to reconsider. "Do you think Parvateshwar wants you to die? And what about me? Why are you trying to hurt me? Do you hate me so much? I am your brother. What have I done to deserve this?" Ananmi had only smiled, her eyes glistening with love and tears. "Bharat, you love me and want me to live, with every fiber of your soul. So let me live. Let me live every last second of my life, in the way that I believe life should be lived. Let me go." Bharat shook his head as if to clear his mind. My apologies, Kartik. Kartik stepped forward and held Bhagat's arm. Prince, your sister was right about you. You will make a far better king than your father. Bhagat snorted. He already knew the Chandravanshi army that had been ordered to march to Devagiri under the command of the Meluhan Brigadier Vraka had rebelled against his father, Emperor Dilipa. The soldiers believed that the Indian emperor had led them into an ill-conceived battle where they were fighting on the side of their former enemies, the Meluhans, against their Nilkanth. Bhagat knew that a section of the troops had already set out for Devagiri to convince him to ascend the throne. But he didn't care. He was tormented by the impending loss of his beloved sister. But do you know what the mark of a great king is? Asked Kartik. Bhagat looked at Kartik. It's the ability to remain focused, regardless of personal tragedy. You will have time to mourn your sister and brother-in-law, Prince Bhagat. But not now. You are the only one here who can whistle like a night bird and make it sound natural. You cannot fail. Yes, Lord Kartik, said Bhagat, addressing the young man as his lord for the first time. Kartik turned around. Come here. A Branga soldier marched up. Prince Bhagat, said Kartik, this man will remain here to support you in your task. Bhagat didn't object. Kartik quickly walked back to Gopal. Seeing the pensive look of the Vasudev chief, Kartik asked, what happened, Banditji? Gopal pointed to the Suryavanshi soldier. Lord Parvateshwar has sent a message. Maharishi Bhrigu has refused to leave the city. Kartik shook his head. Why are the Meluhans so bloody eager to die? What do I do, Lord Kartik? Asked the Suryavanshi. Take me to Maharishi Bhrigu. A flickering sacrificial flame spread its light as best as it could in the night. Its reflection on the nearby Saraswati river aided its cause. Ganesh sat quietly on a patla, a low stool, with his legs crossed and his fleshy hands placed on his knees, his long fingers extended out delicately. He wore a white dhoti. A barber was shearing Ganesh's hair, while Ganesh kept chanting a mantra softly and dropping some ghee into the sacrificial flame. Having removed all of Ganesh's hair, the barber put his implement down and wiped his head with a cloth. Then he picked up a small bottle he had taken from Yavati, poured the disinfectant into his hands and spread it on Ganesh's head. It's done, my lord. Ganesh didn't reply. He looked directly at the sacrificial flame and spoke softly. She was the purest among them all, Lord Agni. Remember that as you consume her, take care of her and carry her straight to heaven, for that is where she came from. She was, is and forever will be a goddess. She will be the mother goddess. It was late in the night when a tired Shiva trudged back to his sati. The Pashupashastra was ready. There were just a few more tests that needed to be conducted. Tara was at it. The peace conference area was within the external blast radius of the Pashupashastra, so Sati's body would be moved from her icy tomb the next morning. What nobody dared verbalize was that, without the Meluhan cooling mechanism, her body would start decomposing, and she would need to be cremated. That was something Shiva refused to contemplate. Shiva opened the door of the inner chamber in the building, shivering at the sudden blast of cold air. He could see Ganesh, his son, standing next to the ice tower, holding his dead mother's hand. His head had been shaven clean. The Lord of the Nagas was on his toes, his mouth close to his mother's ear. Following an ancient tradition, he was whispering hymns from the Rig Veda into her ear. Shiva walked up to Ganesh and touched his shoulder lightly. Ganesh immediately pulled up his white ankvistram and wiped his eyes before turning to face his father. Shiva embraced his son. I miss her, Baba. Ganesh held Shiva tightly. I miss her too. Ganesh began to cry. I abandoned her in her hour of need. You weren't the only one, my son. I wasn't there either. But we will avenge her. Ganesh kept sobbing helplessly. I want to kill them all. I want to kill every single one of those bastards. We will kill the evil that took her life. Shiva held his son quietly while he sobbed. He closed his eyes and pulled Ganesh in tighter, and whispered hoarsely, whatever the cost. Virabhadra and Kritika had come to the Rajat platform. Kritika had lived in Devagiri for a long time and knew most people, so she had been trying to speak to those who were choosing to stay back, trying to convince them to leave. Virabhadra, I need to talk to you. Virabhadra turned around to see Kali and Parshhuram standing behind him. Yes, Your Highness, said Virabhadra. In private, said Kali. Of course, said Virabhadra, touching Kritika lightly before walking away. Vidamali, spat out Virabhadra, his face hardening with fury. He's the main conspirator, said Kali. He's hidden in the city, badly injured from some recent skirmish. Parshhuram touched Virabhadra's shoulder. We have to enter the city in a small group and locate him. Kali touched her knife, a serrated blade that delivered particularly painful wounds. We need to encourage him to talk. We need to know the identity of the assassins who escaped. That son of a bitch deserves a slow, painful death, growled Virabhadra. That he does, said Kali. But not before we've made him talk. Parshhuram stretched his hand out, palm facing the ground. For the Lord Neelkanth. Virabhadra placed his hand on Parshhuram's. For Shiva. Kali placed her hand on top. For Sati.